Hey, this is Dan. Well, we're in a recession. Unemployment rate is up. The stay-at-home order is still in place, and many businesses are still asking people to work from home. The question is then, should we expect to see an increase in the number of short sales and foreclosures in the Portland real estate market? The answer might surprise you. Is whether people decide to sell or have to sell as a result of the COVID outbreak or not, they're not going to be in a foreclosure and short sale situation in large numbers. If you look at the 3 years leading up to the Great Recession that officially began in 2008, on average, Americans were pulling $275 billion in equity out of their homes per year. In the last 3 years, the 3 years leading up to the coronavirus outbreak, Americans were only pulling out $82 billion per year. Now, obviously, that's still a lot of money, but it's less than a third of what we saw per year 10 years ago. As a result, people in this country currently have a lot more equity in their house than they did 10 years ago. So if they decide to sell, or if they need to sell, they're going to be able to afford it, whereas 10 years ago, prices began to drop very quickly, and the equity just wasn't there in a way to be able to absorb it. In fact, according to a leading consulting agency on the subject, over 40% of homeowners in this country hold no mortgage debt on their house. Meaning, regardless of what other things may happen in the economy and with employment, over 40% of the people in the country have no debt, virtually no chance of going into foreclosure. Moreover, nearly 60% of homeowners in this country have at least 60% equity in their house. That's an incredible number, and again, while we don't expect major swings in prices, if there were a decrease and people had to sell, 60% of the country has 60% equity in their home, meaning they're going to be able to absorb that should it come up. 10 years ago, these numbers did not exist due to all the equity being pulled out and the sharp price drop that kicked off the recession. A leading economist from the National Association of Realtors has said that the temporary softening of the real estate market will likely be followed by a strong rebound once the economic quarantine is lifted, and it's critical that supply is sufficient to meet pent-up demand. As you see here, buyer traffic is extremely high across the country, and housing supply on the sale side, or on the seller side, still is not keeping up. As a result, if people decide that they need to sell or want to sell after the COVID outbreak is done, there's still going to be pent-up demand left over on the buyer side that's going to absorb the additional seller supply. Put more simply, we still have more demand than we do supply. So if we hit a period where supply starts to come up and demand starts to ease, it means we're going to have plenty of room to start to balance things out a little bit better, which might return the market to a more normal pace, something a little less frenetic than we've seen over the last 5 to 7 years, but not one where things start to decrease, and certainly not one where we have reason for panic. Thanks for tuning in to a brief overview as to why we should not expect to see an increase in foreclosures and short sales here in the Portland area, at least not to a substantial level. We have good equity, we have a strong market, demand for housing still outpaces supply. All signs indicate that we're going to be fine. You should not expect to see a bump in these types of sales. Do note, there are short sales and foreclosures all the time. So if you see a couple pop up while you're looking for a house, you see one pop up in your neighborhood, that's not a sign that this has started. Next time, we're going to talk about mortgage forbearance, what your options are, and whether or not delaying your mortgage payments in this current condition is a good choice for you. If you have any questions in the meantime, or would like to find out how home values have been affected by the COVID period in your neighborhood, feel free to reach out and we'll get you an updated report. In the meantime, have a great day.